Hello and welcome to Every Horror Movie on Netflix, the show where we watch, review, and discuss every horror movie on Netflix. I am Chris, and I am back again with Patrick.
Hello.
And Steven.
Sup.
And happy October. We are plunging right into the spookiest of months, and we have a discussion prepared for you of Veronica.
We've prepared the discussion. I didn't recall like any kind of pre-recording meeting or anything like that, but I feel prepared enough.
I spent an entire hour and 43 minutes preparing for this, watching the movie.
Yes.
Wow, motherfucker sat through the credits.
We're not entirely flying by the seat of our pants here on Every Horror Movie on Netflix. So yeah, this week we're talking about Veronica, which is from 2017, 2019?
Mm-hmm. 2017.
It's pretty old, but I remember when it made a little splash. I think is it an End film?
It is End film.
Yes.
Yeah.
But before we get into all that, we like to do a little catch up on what else we've been watching or consuming horror related, or if any horrifying experiences have happened to us lately. So what you guys been up to?
Yeah, so I have two things. One of them at the recommendation of Elric Kane on the Colors of the Dark podcast, and also a couple of our fans on the Discord. I watched a little movie called Speak No Evil. It's a Shudder original. And this is about a Danish family, husband and wife, and a little girl. They're on vacation in Italy, and they meet a Dutch family who seems very eager to become friends. They have a little boy that's a little standoffish, doesn't really speak very much. The Dutch family seems very excited to become friends with the Danish family and to possibly meet up sometime in the future. Invite the Dutch family over invite the Danish family, over for vacation. And they do. Several months after the trip, they get a postcard inviting them out to a cottage, and it seems like it's going to be a great time. Well, as soon as they arrive, things are just very off. And it's kind of almost like a nightmare comedy of manners in which the host family just doesn't seem to remember key details about the family they've invited to visit them. It makes a lot of very awkward, cringy faux pas. That's 3/4 of your movie. There's not really much horror going on. When it does escalate to horror, I will say it is very upsetting. It's a movie with an extremely bleak ending that I'm still questioning whether or not it was quite worth the ride. But I'm happy for having seen it because every once in a while, I like a movie that gives me an anxiety attack about something that is not related to anything in my life. It was a good distraction.
That reminds me, that sounds quite a bit like a movie I watched, a year or two ago called Harry, He's Here to Help. French movie, or With a Friend Like Harry.
Yes, it's very, very, very similar vibes. Not similar outcome or finale, but yeah, it's like 60 minutes of just like, oh my god, get me out of this room, get me out of this house, and yeah. The other thing is, I just finished reading Stephen King's Revival for the Amon Discord book club. I know Patrick has finished it as well. By the time this episode comes out, we will have already had our discussion on the book club on the Discord. So I was wondering, Patrick, maybe we can just for, 30, 60 seconds, talk about broad strokes. What was your general impression of that one?
It's funny because I was going to bring it up in my horror catch-up if I went first. And I, for some reason, had it in my head as Arrival. So I'm glad that you said this title first because I would have described it as Stephen King's Arrival for some reason. What were my impressions of it? It's not very, very horror. There are a couple of moments that were memorably awful. But yeah, it's kind of one of those just hangout books. And particularly, it feels very autobiographical. It feels like Stephen King talking about his own life. It reminded me very much of the last book we read, The Pallbearers Club, which felt like Paul Tremblay talking about himself and his own life, kind of thinly veiled autobiography. I don't know. What were your impressions, Stephen?
Well, I understand. So something I learned once I started getting serious into reading again as an adult is that never confuse the protagonist with the author. And I know with King it is very difficult to do that, but there's a little bit of stuff in here where it does feel like King kind of riffing and talking about his opinions about things, especially when it comes to like music and stuff. But I don't think anything in this like remotely happened to him, at least from what we know about him. I don't think any of these other, I don't think the protagonist or any of the other characters are really based on him, though I think a lot of his worldview hangs on the protagonist. And I kind of liked it. It's a long hang of a book. It's a book where, we've got characters traversing the country over and over again over the span of decades. And it's not even a slow build to horror. There isn't really much build up, but when the horror does arrive at the end, I found it to be suitably frightening and strange.
Yeah, I guess it doesn't feel autobiographical in the sense that, like, I think he actually had this sort of relationship with a character who kind of followed him from his childhood to adulthood at crucial moments. But I think sort of the character's just sort of personality and the way he described various life events. Of course, he goes through an addiction phase. He talks about music a lot. And that just reminded me a lot of King himself. I don't know. Yeah, it is a hangout book. Like, you're just hanging out with this guy for a long time.
Would you give it a view it, a Q it, or a screw it?
Low Q, I think.
I give it a high Q, I think. I wasn't like totally satisfied in the end, but it's a sleepy read, and David Morse's narration on the audiobook makes it even sleepier. But I enjoyed every second of it. I think like the writing is great. Yeah, there's some of the usual King hang-ups. I mean, he writes about women not so well sometimes. He's very interested in the past 20 years in writing about men who have a love interest who's half their age. There's a lot of just unnecessary sexual overtones.
There's a lot of weird
even in
sex
like
stuff.
Really harrowing moments, he's got to talk about his boner. Like,
yeah. I mean, and he's always gross when he's talking about sex. Pretty much always gross when he's talking about sex, but never more so in any of his books that I've read, which, to be fair, is not a ton, fewer than 10 probably. But never more gross in my experience than in this book. Yeah, there are some crucial moments where he's just flashing back to his literal teenage boner as a middle-aged man.
Yeah, hey, boy, and we will have said more in the Discord discussion on this, which is why if this sounds remotely interesting to you, you should definitely check out the next book that we'll be reading, which is Dark Harvest by Norman Partridge. It's a short one. I'm picking a short one for October because I want to read some other shit and watch some movies with you guys, hopefully, and be able to have the time for that. So look forward to reading along with me and maybe Patrick, possibly Chris, and having a discussion in the Discord lounge around Halloween. Patrick, what have you been up to? Anything horror-wise now that we're in the spooky season?
Other than finishing off Revival, whatever you want to call it, not a lot. Revisited The Shining. That's the only real thing. Allison with a Y had never seen it, and I really wanted them to watch Dr. Sleep. I mean, The Shining, of course, a classic, but in my mind it was a little bit like, okay, let's get through The Shining so we can watch Dr. Sleep, because Chris talking about it last episode really got me stoked to rewatch it.
It's like when I show people Alien.
Man.
No, The Shining
took me a second.
The Shining was a delight to rewatch. I hadn't seen it in several years, and it fucked with my head too. I think, I got a little high while watching it, and it was I couldn't fall asleep for a while because I was just thinking about stuff from The Shining, and it was rather disturbing to think about. What?
I'm remembering this because you texted me.
Patrick, did I?
Patrick texted me and was like, I just watched The Shining. He was like, I'm high. It's actually really kind of freaking me out and unsettling me. And I was like, it's based on a true story, right? It's all real.
Yeah, that was good. It also made me want to rewatch Room 2. I always mix up the number 237, right? Yeah, I want to rewatch that because that's a phenomenal film, and I wanted to revisit some of the theories around it because obviously Allison and I were kind of trying to break it down because naturally I think someone's first response to seeing The Shining is, what was that all about? Why was he in the picture? So you want to think about it a little bit. And of course, I ran through kind of the common interpretation around the indigenous burial ground. But I really want to revisit some of the wilder and farther out theories on it. So looking forward to revisiting Room 237, looking forward to revisiting Dr. Sleep on this journey.
Can I ask you, have you read The Shining? Because I think more importantly, that might be worth returning to more than Room 237, because most of those theories are like almost like exploitatively bizarre and strange.
Oh, yeah, which, I mean, is part of the fun. But, yeah, I have read The Shining. It's been a long time, though. I don't remember much about it. That was part of when I was in kind of my, like, high, like, Shining K-hole that night. I was rereading, like, a synopsis of the book on Wikipedia, which struck me as I was surprised that it, at least on the surface, like, the synopsis, not too different from the way things go in the movie. But I do remember the book having a very different tone. Christopher, what have you been watching or doing or reading or whatever the fuck?
I've been watching quite a bit of stuff, and I'm going to indulge myself and do shameless self-promotion of my Letterboxd, which I haven't talked about in a while, but I log most of the stuff I watch just very, very laboriously so on Letterboxd at Amon Chris, EHMON Chris. So if you want full thoughts on things I'm watching, you can check that out. Recently, I watched The Empty Man.
Mm-hmm.
Which, if you want to see it, too bad, because it was on HBO Max. Well, actually, not too bad, because I saw stuff on social media about how it was leaving HBO Max and how it didn't have a physical release and how it was going to end up being a lost film, so you better watch it today while you have the chance. And so I watched it. And now it's off of HBO Max and it's not available to stream anywhere, but you can still get it on VOD and buy it off of Apple and Amazon and things like that. So it's still out there if you want to spend a little money, but it's not streaming for free anywhere. But it's The Empty Man, and this thing was a treat. I know Steven watched it like a year ago. I guess I kind of am late to the party on this, but...
Oh, well, like nobody saw it when it came out. I feel like I just kind of... The title threw me off. It wasn't well promoted, and I just kind of came to it by luck.
Yeah,
and
and you really had the perfect review by text where you said that you were expecting it to be like the Bye Bye Man or one of those sorts of movies, and it is that for like 20 minutes, and it's every other type of movie you can think of for about 20 minutes.
It's almost like an anthology in a weird way.
It is. It's like
that sounds fascinating.
It goes down a lot of story holes that you would not expect it to go down, but they're all well done, and I really enjoyed the movie. And it gets better the more I think about it, even though it didn't really succeed at what it was trying to do. I think it succeeded at something else that was just as good for me. And I don't even know how to even set it up other than that. I won't even tell you what it's about. It's about a curse.
Yeah.
It's bigger than that. I thought the whole movie was about to take place in 1995 Bhutan.
Well, the way this movie was sold to me, and I probably mentioned, I know I mentioned on the show like a year or so ago, is like, just watch the first 20 minutes, and that's like an amazing, horrifying Lovecraftian short film in and of itself. And if you feel like watching the whole 2 hours and 20 minutes or whatever, fine. There's lots of fun stuff to be had, but like that first 20 minutes is like a masterclass in Lovecraftian horror. Like I could see showing that to a classroom and just discussing that independent of everything else in it.
Yeah. Really interesting, because I expected that prologue to last like 5 minutes, and then it lasted like 20 minutes. And I was like, does this whole movie take place here? No, it takes place in modern day. It takes place in I don't even know where it takes place. It takes place in, the like North Carolina or Georgia or something. But interesting. That's The Empty Man. So rent it on Apple and follow me on Letterboxd. Damn it. But now we're going to talk about what we're here to talk about, which is Veronica. And I'm going to put the accent on the O because there's the accent on the O, and that's the way the characters pronounce the character's name in this film. This is a Spanish movie directed by the guy who directed the first Wreck, which I have not seen.
Oh.
Have either of you seen the original Wreck?
Yeah.
No, I've heard it's great.
It's pretty damn good.
I mean, I liked Rec 4, so I have to imagine I like Rec 1.
It's very different from Rec 4.
I wish I had done the 5 seconds of research it would have taken to find that out before you told me just now.
Yeah,
you should have done an hour and 43 minutes and 5 seconds of preparation for this.
Paco Plaza is his name, and this is a movie that's also set. It's a period piece. It's set in more ways than one.
Yeah, I wasn't going to go there,
but it takes place in 1991 in Spain and follows a teenage girl named Veronica who is sort of increasingly taking care of her 3 younger siblings in the absence of her mother, who's always working late at a restaurant/bar. And well, actually funny because it's like she calls it a bar. It's very much like the bar in the bar.
I thought that too.
Where it's like more of like a diner coffee shop, but it's a
very
bar.
well lit. And,
yeah. Anyway, so she's increasingly taking care of her siblings, which is a major plot point in this movie. But she and her friends at school, at the Catholic school that they go to, have a seance during a total solar eclipse.
Of the heart.
Which I thought they were doing that intentionally, but I think it's a coincidence. Like that was the time they could get away while everyone else was going to look at the eclipse. I don't know.
Oh, I don't think so, because they talk about how I forget who talks about how during the eclipse, like the dark can take control over the light or something. So I think they intentionally do it because they think it's going to increase the chances of them contacting the various people they're trying to contact.
Yeah, so they are trying to contact the dead. In particular, they're trying to contact Veronica's father, who is dead. And it's not a very successful ritual. And then dark forces start to haunt Veronica and her family. And it's spooky indeed. And the... lost my train of thought. What was I going to say? The movie opens in media res, which we always love. And like, here's what you need to know. And I think this is how the movie was marketed, especially in Spain. This is quote unquote based on a true story. It's based on a teenage girl who, I guess, did a seance and started suffering physical maladies, seizures and the like, and ultimately
she was seeing things,
hallucinations and such, and she ultimately ended up dying, this real life teenager. And so this movie is very upfront about being like based on this story, which is also notable because I guess the Spanish police actually wrote in their official report that they had witnessed paranormal activity while investigating this death.
Right, which is supposedly like the only time in police history that's ever happened or something, according to like the end titles on this movie. And I guess this is spoiler room material, supposedly. But I mean, the thing about all that is at the end of the movie, it gives you all this information about kind of the real life background to this case, including what appear to be crime scene photos from the site of the real life woman's death. But also includes all this background about how the detective said there was no conceivable explanation for what had happened and basically says, yep, it was supernatural. And I was like, that was chilling to me. And I guess not to tip my hand too much, but this movie was a little, I was kind of lukewarm on most of it. And I was like, you should have told me this up front. I mean, so they explain that it's based on true events, but I wish they had told me up front that the detective was like, yeah, fuck, this was some real shit. Because that was actually chilling to me at the end of the movie. It just came way too late. I wish they had prefaced it with that.
Yeah, that makes sense. If they'd shown like crime scene photos and stuff beforehand, it might have been more interesting. But instead, what they do is they show you a dramatization, and you hear 911 call, or whatever the 911 equivalent in Spain is. Nueve
uno, Chris.
Wow, guys.
Oh, that was cringe. But and it's 911 calls are always scary, right? So I'm like, okay, I'm uncomfortable. You got someone crying for their life right now, and the police go and respond, and we see like the detective go in, and he turns the corner, and he's like, Dios mío. He's like, He's like, holy shit. And then it cuts, and it's like, wouldn't you like to know what happened 4 days earlier? 3 days earlier?
I've never seen a movie open this way, guys. I've never seen it.
It does a kind of...
Like, you wonder how we got here?
It doesn't cut, though. It does a pretty sick transition shot, which is very clever because there are effects involved, but not a lot. Because you've got this weird visual of Veronica like on her back with her mouth stretched unnaturally wide open, which is an effect. But then like she kind of relaxes, the camera moves with her, her mouth like returns to normal, pleasant expression. She stands up and like walks, and it was a cool transition. And there's a lot of nice little visual, I guess, flourishes to this movie in general that I appreciated, and that was one of them. It was a nice way to kind of change the setting in an unusual, oddly jarring, but oddly smooth at the same time way.
But it sets you up basically to wonder, like, what the hell was going on in this house? What happened to the people there? What happened to the children? What's going on? And it shows you that, glimpse, but it doesn't really tell you like what they saw or whatever. And it kind of like wants you to be wondering the whole time. And then we go back to Veronica. We see her do the whole seance and everything. And then we just kind of kill time for an hour and 40 minutes until we get back to that moment.
Yeah, it's just weird shit. Just weird shit happening for a while.
I didn't feel that way. I mean, I understand why you felt that way. I thought this is well directed, well edited, had a good sense of momentum to it, but like pretty low stakes, admittedly. I wouldn't say it was killing time, but I do understand someone feeling that way.
I agree with Chris on that, actually. I mean, it did feel like it was just kind of, all right, weird shit has to happen for her.
Much like it kind of felt to me like a movie that like was kind of felt obligated to be spooky and didn't really know how. It was there was a lot of the like every day-to-day life and day-to-day drama in Veronica's life, but it wasn't really developed. And I got kind of frustrated because I got to a certain point in this movie and I was like, I don't really know what I'm supposed to care about right now. Like, we got the stuff that goes bump in the night, and we know that's going to escalate to this like showdown with the police at the end. But in the meantime, like, there's all these plot threads about her parents and her friends and her reproductive system and like the kids, and it's like all this stuff is interesting, but the movie doesn't seem to care about it half as much as I might. So it's like things are just kind of brought up and disposed of. And really, I thought it was just spinning its wheels and was dreadfully boring. It didn't give me anything to connect the spooky scenes together.
I largely agree with that, except I disagree with what you said about it not knowing how to do spooky scenes. I think there are some very effective and very memorable spooky scenes in this, and that was some of what I enjoyed most about it. But it did, to me, feel like it was spinning its wheels a lot of the time, kind of getting from spooky little set piece to spooky little set piece. And yeah, I don't know. I wasn't terribly invested in the family drama, the friend drama. The lead actress is fine, but I never really connected with Veronica. It's not a bad performance. It's just felt a little empty to me, and I never quite connected to her as a character. I was fascinated by, and I don't want to necessarily celebrate this performance, but I was fascinated by the little kid Antonito, who's basically like
Spain's, earlier, I guess late Spirit of J award nominee for me. He's in the running.
Basically like Spain's answer to the little kid from Jerry Maguire. He's got like the giant glasses that surely have like magnifying like lenses in them to make his eyes look unnaturally large, and his eyes are always slightly crossed. He is adorable. I noticed that on the Wikipedia page, the director described him as a young Marlon Brando in glasses or something like that.
Yeah, that's almost exactly it. And I'm like, I don't know what that's about, but I loved Antonito. Like, he was the soul of this movie for me. I'm like, you got a teenage girl who's stuck at home, having to take care of her siblings, Dad's dead, mom's working in the bar all the time, and she's not it's not like she's a drunk or anything, which I kind of expected in a movie like this for that to maybe come to the fore, but no, she's just not around. So poor
she's just depressed and
Veronica
overworked.
Veronica's stuck like taking care of these adorable children, and I really kind of felt for that. I felt like this was really, especially with like the early 90s vibe that I think this movie captures really well. I felt this feeling of like the isolation of this like young woman who, has not even menstruated yet when we meet her, having to like be a mother essentially to her own siblings who are much younger than her. And I thought that there was something just kind of sad and also kind of disquieting about that, that there's no adult around to verify what's happening. When mom comes home, the younger siblings are like, yeah, there was someone in our apartment, and Veronica is like, well, no, because she doesn't know how to explain what actually happened. And I found that stuff to be very compelling.
But that's the kind of thing that so much of the human drama is built around, and it just aggravates me in no end. And it aggravates me in every show and every movie where it's like you have drama that doesn't arise from the circumstances. It arises from a character just refusing to explain anything to another character. Like, yeah, everyone's fucking freaked out. The mom is like almost thinking Veronica's abusing the kids because they're like, I was being choked in my bed.
Yeah.
And the mom's like, what's going on? Was there someone in the house? And Veronica's like, no, I guess I'm just an asshole. Good night. And of course it creates more drama, but it's just like with the friends. Like she has this very strained relationship with her friends, which is almost interesting because she's got like a best friend who's like hanging out with a new girl and they're getting closer together and leaving Veronica out of things. But like when she needs their help to like do a seance, she at no time like tries to explain what's going on. She just like crashes their house party and starts slapping people. And so of course there's drama, but it's just, it's 13 Reasons Why was like this. I'm like, just sit down and explain something before you go around half cocked.
Okay, so I have two thoughts on this. One is like, I understand your frustration. Normally this shit bothers the hell out of me, and it did a little bit in this movie, but on the other hand, I felt like it did such a good job of putting us in the shoes of our teenage protagonist that like I understand that she doesn't really know what's going on, and she doesn't have like the tools or the wherewithal to communicate all of the suffering and the terror and the trauma that she's going through. So yeah, she's going to be a teenager and just show up at the house party and start screaming. Like it made logical sense to me, but it wasn't necessarily satisfying as a viewing experience, I suppose. But I didn't feel like any of that was overplayed necessarily to the point that I got actively annoyed by it.
Yeah, I don't know if I have any thoughts on that, but I do have thoughts on speaking of like strange things that happen to the kids that become a point of tension between her and the mom. You know what really upset me and hit me on at least as hard of a level as any of the big kind of like visually dramatic, if somewhat effectsy scenes in this movie was when Antonito gets burnt in the bathtub. Yeah. The water in the bathtub mysteriously gets really hot. And it's not a thing where you like see him in the bathtub and it's like steaming and he's like looking around. Like Veronica just leaves the room and comes back and he's like very upset, like basically crying, and she pulls him out and like his little belly is all like pink from getting burnt in the bathtub. I don't know, there was just something to that was like, oh, poor baby. I don't know. It was just really upsetting to me.
Child abuse.
Yeah, imagine that.
That really freaked me out too, because Antonito like doesn't blame her. Like he understands that it's something else and that he's oddly not all that frightened by, but we see that with children in these sorts of movies that involve the paranormal sometimes. And I was feeling for Veronica and that like, oh my God, like she doesn't know what's up or what's down at this point. Did she turn the water up or not? She's very freaked out and worried that she might have actually like almost like killed her little brother or like, grievously injured him. And I was very moved by that too, and thought it was pretty creepy, and it hit home with me.
So I didn't necessarily read it as her not being sure if she had done it herself.
She was at least worried that she was going to be blamed for it. I mean, of course, but there was. Yeah. I mean, she was like, I finished the movie today, and I'm pretty sure that there is a moment where she's like, oh my God, like, did I do this? Did I fuck up?
She apologizes, and Antonita's like, oh, it's not your fault. But yeah, I mean, at that point, she's kind of taking responsibility for everything that's going wrong in that house, whether or not it's her or a ghost or a shadow person or a canker man.
Oh my God, I did think of the canker man. Chris, we're on the same page today.
Anyway,
we need to talk about Sister Death.
Sister Death. Yes, Sister Death.
Old blind nun who is the purveyor of exposition.
She's the Tony Todd of the school.
Yeah, she's the Tony Todd to the degree that you get it in this movie. And I enjoyed the visual of Sister Death and also the performance. There was something a little kooky about it, a little, she's walking around fucking blasting cigs, chain smoking, revealing
like
small
the young
bits
Pope.
of information to Veronica. Yeah, like the young Pope. I don't know. I enjoyed that. That was just a character that kind of gave this a little jolt to me in a way that I enjoyed when I wasn't connecting terribly well with a lot of the other characters.
I agree. I also disagree a little bit, but she didn't do a lot for me visually. I think it's kind of played out to be like, oh, it's a nun and her eyes are white, and isn't that weird?
Yeah.
It's like, I don't know. I know I'm getting to know a lot of nuns in real life. Like, they're all nice people. Just if you're a blind nun, you're just a blind nun. It doesn't have to be played for horror.
Chris, that's such a funny statement to anybody who doesn't know the context. Like Stephen and I understand why you said that, but it's such a funny statement without the context.
Yeah.
Just you've been getting to know the nuns lately.
Anyway. But I thought that once she goes from just being like the spooky crone watching you from the tower, she was very interesting. And she's like the only character that Veronica has like heart to hearts with about the spooky evil. And it only happens like twice. And then, so I was so frustrated when that nun is like really starting to reveal character and really starting to provide some clues as to what the hell's going on. The like school teacher is like, all right, let's get your ass to bed. You shouldn't be down here.
Hanging out in the basement.
I was like, hold on. I was into that. But just another example of this movie kind of drawing my interest, and then what it really wants me to do is count down how many days are left until the cop comes around the corner and says, holy shit.
Right.
And that wasn't really what I was interested in.
I understand what you're saying about the kind of played out trope of the, scary nun with the white eyes, but there was something about, I think, both the makeup on her and the way she was lit and the performance that seemed amusingly almost cartoonish to me. It was as if you had almost directly adapted the old witch, like the crone in Snow White, who like gives Snow White the fucking apple or whatever. It felt like that had just been like beautifully translated to screen. It just felt like it came out of like almost a separate movie in a very fun way. Like she showed up and I was like, I wanted to fucking like just a fucking like metal guitar like shredding behind her or something. It was like just big weird rock star energy to her when she showed up. I enjoyed that.
I wanted the Vampires theme song every time.
Yes. Can we listen to that Vampires theme again?
It depends on who's editing this episode.
Well, you might be happy to know that they're making a prequel film called Sister Death.
So we're gonna get to know all about her. Yeah,
well, you get to find out about how she got the name Sister Death.
I don't want that.
by her experiments with euthanasia at the convent.
I don't want to watch that any more than I want to watch The Nun.
You should watch The Nun. It has
actually no. I do want to watch it slightly more than I want to watch The Nun. I take that back.
The Nun is, you know what? The Nun had some stuff going for it.
Really?
It wasn't good, but I liked what they were trying to do. It has a cool aesthetic, and it has the most unchained, absurd, blasphemous endings I've ever seen in my life.
Wow. Okay. Interesting.
I was offended as a Christian, and I'm not even Christian. Anyway.
Huh. All right. I'll check that out.
Yeah.
Well, guys, should we review it and get into some spoilers?
Yeah.
Yeah, I think it's about that time. Steven, I don't know. I feel like you might be the wild card, so maybe I'll save you for last. How about you, Patrick? Would you view it, cue it, or screw it? Veronica.
Come back to me. I don't know. I don't have a decision.
Okay.
I don't have a decision.
Okay, I'll go first then. I'm sorry, I gotta give this a screw it.
My heart.
I did not like this at all. It was one of the more boring films that I've watched, I think. I was flailing, trying to find something to connect to.
Wait. One of the more boring films you watched, like just period? Not for Amon? Oh, for Amon.
Which means yes in the total experience of my life, because the bulk of the boring films I've watched have been on this show. And I like Steven says, well directed. There's some creative stuff going on. There's a few moments and a few ideas that I really liked that we can talk about in the spoiler room. But on the whole, I was just trying so hard to find the scary scenes I didn't think were that scary. The drama scenes weren't working for me. And I just, as the closer we got to this cop coming around the corner and saying, oh my God, the more I just kind of resented like being expected to care about that moment over everything else going on in that movie. And when the moment finally arrived, it was underwhelming as fuck. And the last 5 minutes of this movie that we'll talk about in the spoiler room are an abomination in my view. So I give it a screw it.
Did it upset you as a Christian?
I wasn't Christian when I watched this one, but I was Christian when I watched The Nun, because that was the universe of the film.
Oh, okay.
When I watched Incantation, I was Buddhist.
Did the Nun like break your Christianity? Did it turn you away from the faith?
No.
With its blasphemy?
No, listen, we'll talk about that later. All right, Patrick, your turn.
I don't know. I'm just hesitating because I don't want to give it a screw it, because that seems mean.
It does seem mean, and I will say I hold everyone harmless. And the director, like I said, Rex probably great. I'll watch Sister Death. I thought there was a lot of craft going on here. God bless them all, but this really missed the mark for me.
Yeah, I don't know. I guess I'll just go with the screw it.
My man.
There, like you said, there is decent craft on display. There are some very cool spooky moments, but yeah, it didn't quite hang together for me. I don't like the opening. I just got lost and bogged down in the kind of middle proceedings, getting from that opening back to the opening again. I wish they had told me more about this being a true life, they tell you it's a true life thing. But as I said before, I wish they had told me more about those circumstances up front, because I think it would have freaked me out more. I don't know. Yeah, it just wasn't sticky for me. It just, very little of it stuck to me, unfortunately. And I feel bad about that, because it's not bad. I just can't really recommend anybody spend time on it, even like on a cue it kind of level. So yeah, screw it, I guess. Steven.
I can recommend that people spend time with it on a cue it level, and I will give it a cue it. I've seen this twice. I watched it initially, I think actually, like Speak No Evil, I heard about it on Colors of the Dark, or it used to be Shockwaves before a couple of the co-hosts got canceled. And I watched it back then and thought, this is pretty middling, but I liked the vibe, I liked the direction, I liked the feeling of just, spooky shit's happening at home with a teenager who's having to babysit her own siblings and who is, pretty helpless, has a mom who's not around, a dad who's dead. I thought it, I don't know, there's something about that vibe I like. I like a good babysitter movie. And I thought it was pretty spooky at times. I thought some of the kind of dream scare sequences were actually pretty jarring. Especially when the score changes to 40s monster movie music during a couple of those.
I did like the music.
And
that
I'm
was
like,
cool.
Whoa, I don't know how I'm supposed to feel, but this is pretty scary. Yeah, overall, I liked it, and you guys know I don't like possession movies, but I feel like this has enough of a diversion from the usual possession movie tropes that I found it pretty engrossing. My biggest problem with it is probably the fact that it is, based, however loosely, on quote unquote real life events. I feel like that's just a red herring that it's a trope as old as horror movies probably, and I find it kind of tiresome. And unfortunately, this entire movie is structured around that and the sort of quote unquote reveal at the end of the police report. But I think overall it's a little too long, but I had a pretty good time with it, even on a second rewatch.
I think, frankly, what I want is a documentary about this case. I wanted to know more about the case itself. That was almost that was where they got me most, was fucking crime scene photos and whatever. But we'll talk more about that.
Yeah, and like, based on a true story, I love seeing that shit. I love it when The Conjuring 2 starts and it's like, this is actually a true story. It's like, it's funny to me.
It's like based on real terrible people.
That's all good. But then to like really commit to the bit and then like, at the expense of the actual storytelling in the movie. And then, then you could get into the ethical hole of like, should you be adapting a real life tragedy in this sort of way? It's not like a real life event like, oh, this girl saw a ghost, but like someone died.
Yeah, I love based on a true story, but I love when it's really not based on a true story and they're just like trying to sell you on it. Yeah. American Hustle has a hilarious opening title along those lines. I forget what it is, but it's something like made... I'm not going to even try to remember it, but it's a twist on that. Or, yeah, like The Conjuring, where it's like, okay, Ed and Lorraine Warren were real, and we're going to tell you all about the time that they saw The Nun,
Right. This is a true story as told by Ed and Lorraine Warren.
Absolute bullshitters.
Yeah. But yeah, Steven, I know you don't like possession movies, but like I remember you explained once the reason you don't like possession movies is kind of the inherent misogyny in so many of them. So I think it's worth noting that maybe the reason this hits you different is because Veronica has a ton of agency, and it doesn't end with like her getting slapped by a priest, It ends with her like trying to do her own little ritual.
Right. Yeah, that's a good point. It did hit me differently because of that. She takes control. She does her research. She tries to figure out how to undo the curse best she can. And we'll get into the rest in a few moments.
We'll get into it. All right.
American Hustle's opening title is Some of This Actually Happened.
Yes, that's great.
And that's my ideal take on like a quote unquote based on true events movie, is where they're just kind of fucking with you a little bit.
Yeah. All right, well, we're about to go down the spoiler room and spoil everything about Veronica, but before we do that, let us remind you that if you can't wait for our next episode, you should reach out to us online, and you follow us on social media. We are on Facebook, we are on Instagram, we are on Twitter at AmonCast, EHMON Cast. We have a website called everyhorrormovieonnetflix.com. There you can see a little directory of some of the movies that we've watched. You can go to our little merchandise store and buy a shirt or a mouse pad or various other accessories with Every Horror Movie on Netflix artwork on them. And of course, you can join our Discord server. There's a link to that in the show notes. We have a little, great little community there that kind of talks about horror stuff all the time. And we like to hear from you there. We like to hear from you by email. And we always like to know what you thought of the movies that we talk about. So with that said, let's go on down to the spoiler room and spoil everything in just a minute. Welcome back. We are down here in the spoiler room, getting ready to spoil everything about Veronica. What happens? What does that cop finally see after 4 days when he turns the corner into that apartment?
The same fucking thing we saw in the opening.
Same fucking shit. It's the same. It's a small progression of shit. And I mean, the spooks, I would call them, for the most part, standard fare. You got your shadow people. You got your black arms coming out of the walls and the bed and shit. You got your shadows on the wall.
I like the shadow people. There was some good shadow people stuff in this movie. And even though, shadow people is a cliche, you know what else is a cliche? Is fucking a spooky children's toy. No one has ever done that in a movie that I've seen. Had sex with a spooky children's toy. But I mean, a fucking spooky children's toy. And there's one in this that has like a wheel with like little wedges of color that light up.
Simon.
Yeah, Simon Says.
It's Simon.
I never had one of those.
Yeah,
I was a bubble
toy.
child.
He was a bubble child, but you know what we're talking about when we say Simon.
No, I don't. But there's a scene where the shadow person is coming after, I forget, one of the kids or something, and the toy, the Simon whatever, is going fucking nuts, lighting up different colors, and I like the way they played with that, showing the shadow going across the wall, affecting corporeal objects as it moves across the wall, different lights lighting up on the toy and changing the color and the position of the shadow. That was a cool shot. I liked that.
I like that kind of shit because it gave me, I had this multiple times during the movie, Poltergeist vibes. Especially since it's, instead of early 90s, not in the 80s exactly, but it felt very much like when we're just left with the kids in Poltergeist. Good creepy shit.
Yeah.
I mean, yeah, and again, competent stuff. I didn't think it was that scary or that novel, though. I mean, we've seen all this shit before.
What was novel to me is when she has the dream where she wakes up and her siblings are eating her flesh. That was great. Pretty fucking scary.
That was wild.
Love that. And I think that was one of the moments that had the, monster movie score behind it. Yeah. That was
was great. I meant to say that before the break. I fully second that. I love the use of music in this.
It was so jarring, and I'm like, I'm supposed to be scared, and this is a little campy, but I wound up circling back to, it made it scarier for me somehow. It was just so surreal and, almost Lynchian.
Yeah.
She sees the ghost of her dad, which is scary. That was one of the more effective moments.
Oh, yeah, her naked dad.
Big buff naked dad. It follows vibes.
It follows vibes, but also, she tried to summon her dad, and just like in Ouija Origin of Evil, when they try to summon the dad and something else answers, we know that something else has answered. So when we see the dad, it's very interesting because we're like, is this the dad, or is this something wearing the dad's flesh? Mm-hmm. And that is spooky to me. That was spooky. I gotta go pretty deep into the movie to find other things I liked. Is there anything before we get to the end that you guys thought was interesting or worth mentioning?
There's a thing I want to
the period scene.
Well, yeah, that was pretty well done.
Let's stop there because they do establish, because we've made some references to it. They established early on because Veronica faints and is at the school nurse, and the school nurse has to pry into all her business, and it's like, so you get your period or what? And she's like, no, and they're like, all right, and then she wakes up in bed after some spooky stuff, and it appears that she's gotten her period. Now, did she really? It's kind of hard to say because there's a lot of blood going around in this house by that point, but I think it's more likely than not that that's what happened and what we're supposed to take away from it.
Well, it's hard to figure out what to take away from it, though, is what to take away from it. Why is that a plot point here? It seems like that should mean something more, and I don't really think it does, other than periods are gross and she just had a period and there's blood on her bed.
I disagree. Now, but
is there more significance to that?
Here's the thing, and this is just kind of my whole complaint with the movie, where it kind of brings up some interesting threads, but then it doesn't really follow up on them, and you kind of got to do the work to make them make sense and make them work. Because I think they're doing something thematically. I think that it ties into the whole matter of coming of age and this teen trying to take responsibility, stepping into a maternal role, that sort of thing. I think we're supposed to get the sense that she's coming of age through the events of this movie. But other than the period scene, I don't really see that in the script. There's also the thing that happens after she gets her period where all of the mattresses start having gross burns / goopy marks.
I want to talk about that.
Let's talk about that. What'd you think about that?
I don't know anything about this case aside from what is presented in the movie. I want to read more about it. There probably is a documentary out there somewhere. It seems like it's pretty famous. And the director has said, again, according to the same Wikipedia that Patrick read, but the director has said he wasn't so interested in presenting the truth of this scenario, that it's all a vision, right? But in those police photos, we see the beds turned up with what is clearly, if you don't believe in the supernatural, it's mold. I think they had a serious mold problem in this apartment that led to some to something, some kind of like, what's the word I'm looking for? Like neurological disorder.
Stephen Scully over here.
Yeah.
Well, the neighbor from downstairs comes up and like amongst her complaints about what's happening in the apartment with all the hauntings, she says there's big black spots on my ceiling under your bed, like under where your beds are. I don't know.
So it's all mold.
It's all mold.
That makes sense. Case closed.
They summon a mold demon.
Yeah, but thematically, I thought maybe it was trying to tie into the period thing. You know?
Well, in the Antonito from the beginning of the movie is always promising that he's not going to pee the bed, right?
Oh,
and like
right.
there's that, and then she's trying to she's cleaning up his piss all the time. She eventually has to clean up her blood off the bed. Yeah. I don't feel like the filmmaker is trying to like make any sort of statement about this, but it is a little weird because that is the most unsettling thing in those police photos is just like these shapes under the bed that are clearly spore born somehow.
So those are real crime scene photos.
I don't know.
Because, yeah, that's kind of the consensus I've kind of landed on. But when I saw them, I did not think they were real because of how much they looked like the set of the movie.
And it's like, was the set decoration in this movie so good that it looked like the crime scene photos? Or did they just fake crime scene photos? I couldn't tell.
So I assumed they were real. I did a quick check. I did the most cursory Google earlier today to try and determine if they were real or not. Did not come up with anything conclusive on that. I still assume that they're real because, I mean, so if you do look at like those patterns on the mattresses, they're very different from the ones that are in the rest of the movie.
Oh.
So, it's possible that maybe they made completely different mattresses for fake crime scene photos with a more realistic and believable pattern on the bottom of them. But I think they're actual crime scene photos.
I didn't inspect the photos much when they showed up at the end of the movie because I was kind of ready for it to be over. But I know that like when she's turning up the beds, they each have kind of a corporeal form to them.
Yeah,
vaguely.
They look like a body.
Yeah.
Roughly, yeah.
They look like impressions that a monster has left as he was trying to spoon you. Big spoon, little spoon. I'm not sure. So basically, our hero Veronica goes back and talks to Sister Death and gets the only useful piece of information in the movie, which is Sister Death basically says, "Well, haven't you seen Ouija: Origin of Evil?" And Veronica says, "No." And Sister Death says, well, if you had seen Ouija: Origin of Evil, you would know to always say goodbye when you fuck with a Ouija board. And that's what you didn't do. And that's why this is all happening to you. So she says, you have to do another seance. You have to
do right what you did wrong.
Do right what you did wrong. You got to do it again and say goodbye to this thing so that it leaves you alone. So she's like, great. She goes to the store. She gets a brand new Ouija board because her last one broke during the cursed ritual. She tries to rally her friends. Her friends are too busy doing drugs and having sex. They say, get the fuck out of here. She like slaps some. My favorite character in the movie is like the bro who like steps in because she's talking to her friend, like just basically just screaming her name at her at a party and wondering why she's not being taken seriously. And there's some like bro who like kind of walks up behind her and she's like elbowing the bro and like slapping the bro and he goes away. And then later, like she gets escorted out of the party and the friend is like saying bye to her, and like the same bro is like over her shoulder or something. I don't know. I hyper focused on the bro. I'm sorry.
Well, when you're not into everything else that's going on, I can see how that would happen. Yeah. Those are the details we pick up on.
So then she's like, all right, fuck it. I'll do it all by myself, like Celine Dion. They go to the apartment.
Exactly like Celine Dion.
They go back to the apartment and they have the kids and they're like, all right, kids, our bedtime story for tonight is going to be seance. And they attempt to do, but here's the thing: they like Home Alone. They're trying to like steal themselves, and little Marlon Brando. I already forgot his name. Antonito. My favorite part of this movie.
Brandito.
Antonito. There's a protection symbol.
Yeah.
Kind of
it's
like
Viking
incantation.
too, which is very odd that it's a Viking symbol, but.
And they've used this protection symbol several times in the movie before, and she's like, here, Antonito, you need a job, take your crayon or whatever and draw this on all the walls of the house. And he's like, oh, okay, this is a perfect job for me because he can't even read. This is actually
right. You entrust like the most important job, frankly, in this entire ritual to like the most lovable dipshit Moppet.
Well, he can draw and he can copy an image, and that's what he does. And it all goes well, but then you see he turns the page, because why wouldn't he? He's a kid, and there's another symbol, and this one says that the last one's the mark of protection. Now he's doing the mark of like incantation
Yeah.
and starts drawing that all over the walls. Which I could draw that from memory because I memorized it. But
oh shit! Could you actually?
No.
Oh, okay.
I can. I don't know.
It's very complex.
We should try to do
is.
that sometime.
Yeah, draw me a clock, Chris.
Yeah.
I have anxiety, and I have been anxious numerous times this year. I don't think I've ever been as anxious this year as when I was trying to memorize that symbol as it actively faded away from my screen.
But anyway, that was great. I mean, it was funny for one thing, and it was also upsetting because you know what's at stake. And they set it up really well because they had already done their homework on showing us what that symbol was and that it was important. And then they also established that the kid can't read because, and I thought this scene was funny for another reason. Like, she goes into his room and there's a book on the floor and she's like, why are you looking at a book? You can't even read. And I'm like, all right, that's not the best parenting practice. But, then he's like, oh, Dad was reading me that book, which is kind of scary, kind of cool. So there's a lot of little tiny...
Oh, yeah, and he says, like, yeah, Dad visited, and he's going to take me to his home. That gave me chills.
Yeah.
The little kid stuff in horror movies doesn't usually do it for me, but that was like, oh my God. Especially after reading Revival and the end of that, Patrick. I was like, what does home look like? That doesn't sound good.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. Yeah.
A bunch of little spooky effective moments that then paid off with this big thing where he draws the wrong symbol on the wall. And I thought that was really well done. My favorite part of this movie by far. Then they do the
yeah, and that leads to another kind of fun, like, shadow person moment, because I liked when the shadow person was slowly reaching across the room, and then it reaches the crayon, like, incantation that he's drawn, and it lights on fire when the shadow person touches it. That was fun. It's basic, I guess. It's simple, probably. We've probably seen it or something like it in other movies, but I enjoyed that.
Mm-hmm. So then we have our big seance, and it goes, it's nothing to write home about as far as a seance goes. And it doesn't really work, and you have shadow people all over the house, and then Veronica has to call 911, and so now things are starting to come full circle.
Mm-hmm.
And she's trying to get away with Antonietto. She's got him in her arms. The other kids have already gotten out.
The kids have gotten out, and in a very convoluted way, she like turns and how do they convey this twist? One of the worst twists of all time.
She looks at her reflection in I forget what, and sees that she's holding nothing in her arms. She thinks she has the kid. She doesn't. She doesn't.
And then she's like, wait, if I don't have the kid, how much of my life until this point has been a mold hallucination?
And cue a sequence that would be best scored to the fucking Saw theme.
Right, except none of the little like clues pay off. It's all like it's all stuff like the thing we talked about with the bathtub, like, her saying, "Oh, I'm sorry, I turned on the heat," and the boy's like, "Oh, no, you didn't," and then turns out, yes, she did, because apparently she has just been possessed, I guess, by the spirit and disassociated, and had a lot of the shit those spirits have done, she was actually doing this whole time. Bum, bum, bum. Bum, 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 bum. So I guess it's like thematically what she was forced to become her mother and also forced to become her father who's dead in the ghost. Is that what they're doing here?
It's not.
Frankly, I don't understand.
It's not clean.
I didn't understand.
It's not clean. At this point, we have to do the work to put it together. I will say that's why this is not a view it for me. Thematically, I feel like there's a lot of little pieces, a lot of threads, but I didn't feel like it really congealed into something tangible by the end. Mm-hmm. It was just a good old-fashioned spook show.
I love a twist. But you got to do your homework.
Yeah, that did not come together for me.
It's just like, oh, twist time. Guess what? The girl is bad, actually.
Well, yeah, and I guess, this is where we come back to the true story thing is, again, it's much easier to swallow this is based on a true story when, for example, it's Ed and Lorraine Warren, who are, famous snake oil salesmen, and they're notable. They've claimed to have a lot of exploits, and you can just play with those characters that are kind of in the public domain to some degree. But this is a real girl who died. There's a real, kind of weird story about it where at least some policemen thought there were truly unexplainable consequences or perhaps supernatural consequences behind all this. And it's a real leap for the movie to go, yeah, she, made all this bad shit happen to her family. She did it. It was her. I don't know. It's just a leap to make that accusation, I guess.
It's a mess, and it was disappointing and frustrating, and probably would have been more disappointing and frustrating if I had actually really cared about this character's predicament through the rest of the movie. Because, like we talked about, a lot of the family stuff is pretty compelling. The relationship is cute. Let's say that.
Sure. Yeah. I was very happy that the kids were okay in the end.
Right. Me too. And then a sort of a betrayal of the whole relationship that this Veronica has had with her siblings the whole movie, which is kind of the only sacred thing in the movie. I don't know. Then we have just an abomination. Because we see the whole prologue again. The cops respond. They go into the house. The detective turns the corner. He's like, holy shit. And we're like, oh God, what's it going to be? What happened? It's the same shit. It's the same shit we saw at the beginning. It's the same shit we see in every horror movie. She's doing the exorcism of Emily Rose thing, where she's going her back's bent and she's like, ah!
Like hovering.
And then they take her out on a stretcher and they have an oxygen mask on her. She gets loaded into an ambulance. She's unresponsive. That's the last we see of Veronica. Cardinal sin number 1. The sin that is just, I can't fucking believe this happens in the movie. We linger with the detective. Next 5 to 10 minutes of this movie follow 5 minutes probably, follow the detective. And he's in the house and he's looking around. He gets a walkie-talkie call that says, by the way, Veronica just died. Mm-hmm. You're fucking up in a movie like this when you kill your lead character
off screen,
mm-hmm. And we find out about it as a third party to a conversation between an EMT on a radio and a detective who's been in this movie for 20 seconds.
It feels like it's setting up a sequel about the detective, and we know we're not going to... Well, I shouldn't say we know we're not going to get that now that we have a prequel on the way, but that felt very weird to me, too. They just didn't know how to end this thing.
It was odd how little that detective had to do with anything in the end, because there's a title at the beginning that refers to the detective, and he, figures heavily into that little prologue. And then he has maybe even less time when he shows back screen time when he shows back up again at the end of the movie. He's very incidental to all this.
It boggles my mind, because the movie, like we said, the craft of this movie is good. I don't know how you can fuck up that badly to just mishandle what, could have been. You have to fuck up to have that not be an emotional moment if you see it.
Well, let me put a finer
Chris, I
point
thought
on
you
it.
wanted characters to explain things to each other.
Not like this.
I know, I'm kidding.
So we've talked before, I'm sure on the cast, but at least as friends in real life, about movies that are named after a character, a name that you are not familiar with. Your movie is called Veronica, and you're just going to kill her off screen at the end? Really?
Well, and interesting, too, because that was not the person's name in real life.
Oh, I wondered about that.
I believe it was Estefania was her name in real life. And I was thinking, okay, so even if you're marketing this to Spanish audience and you're marketing it on the basis of a at least somewhat well-known death or police case, whatever, investigation, I was just surprised that you wouldn't. I mean, I'm sure there's all kinds of legal stuff you get into with that, but name it something else other than just a person's fucking name, I don't know. That bothers me with movies in general, when it's just like a generic fucking name. We had this conversation
Michael
recently,
Clayton.
Chris.
Great movie.
Michael
Terrible
Clayton.
title.
Exactly. Give me Ace Ventura Pet Detective. Like, that's a weird name. It tells me something like you're like, what? Pet Detective? Austin Powers, International Man of... See, the 90s knew how to do weird fucking names as movie titles. And since then, people have decided they can just coast on being like, John Smith. It's like, why the fuck do I care about John Smith?
Mm-hmm. Well, apparently you're not supposed to care about Veronica because they kill her off screen.
I guess, yeah.
And tell you about it on a walkie-talkie call, and they expect you to care. They expect you to be okay with it, I should say. I'm not okay with it. As little as I cared about Veronica, I cackled. I howled. I could not believe what I was seeing. It's one of the most absurd choices I've ever seen in a movie. It's like the joke about like, oh, E.T. crashed and died on the way to his home planet or whatever. I don't understand it. There must be some like esoteric. There must be some arcane Spanish libel law in effect why they can't show her die in the movie. I don't.
Chris, I feel like the word malpractice is just on the tip of your tongue right now, and I just want to hear you. I want to hear you say it.
It's cinematic and emotional malpractice.
Oh, there we go.
I'll be getting a demand letter from my attorney very soon.
Well, I'm on record giving this movie a cue it, and yet I just cannot square the fact that it is the fact that it was based on quote unquote real life events and a real police case, whatever. I didn't need any of that. Like, I think most of this stood on its own well enough that just muddies the waters and makes you question some of these decisions that that's one that we would question automatically. But there are other sort of narrative choices in this that just don't really make sense, that seem beholden to the fact that they're using a real case. They're imposing limitations upon themselves. When in reality, it's all conjecture, and a lot of it's kind of made up wholesale. So why not just present this as a complete fiction?
They make so many compromises to be based on this real case, but then they are completely unfaithful to the facts of the real case.
Yeah.
Make it make sense. It's ridiculous. But we're not done. We're not done because it's not like, Veronica died and then it fades to black, end of movie. No, now we got to stay with this detective who all of a sudden is important.
For like 2 minutes.
Watch him. He's like, back at the police station. He's at a fucking typewriter. He's the slowest I've ever seen a man draw a cigarette in my life. The slowest I've ever seen a man light a cigarette in my life. He stares at the empty page.
You watched a lot of X-Files Myth Arc episodes, so I don't fucking believe that.
Cigarette smoking man pulls that shit out quick. He's got places to be. People kill. He stares at the empty page. We like zoom in onto the empty page as he stares at it like it's fucking James Caan in Misery. And then it cuts to like, we see him through. It was like Kolchak the Night Stalker, where at the end of the thing he goes to his little office and you see him through the blinds writing his little thing about like, and then she died. I heard about it on the walkie-talkie, and I just had to say, I wonder who would be finishing her test at school. It was that kind of thing. But he's typing, and we see the title cards that are like
his report,
the supposed facts of the case. It's like. Yeah. On June 15th, 1991. This movie's so obsessed with dates. It's like it's like the Count on Sesame Street likes dates instead of numbers, and he produced this movie.
It's like you playing Box Office Game.
It's like me playing Box Office Game. It's like 1991.
Listeners, go play Box Office Game at boxofficega.me. It's a fun game where you guess the top 5 movies at the box office on a given week, and Chris and I play it every fucking day. You can post your results on the Discord if you want and see how you do. Chris, great. Please continue your tirade.
We'll need a different channel for that. Yeah. Anyway, it's like, it says his name. It's like 1991 detective so-and-so, so-and-so filed, like he's the hero of the story now because he filed a police report where he said, yeah, I don't know what happened in there. Shit was fucked up. It was kind of spooky. Mm-hmm. And then that's the end of the movie.
Executive producer Chris Carter.
Yeah, I mean,
well, That's your movie.
It was just a laughable epilogue to me. It
was pretty ridiculous. I'm not gonna argue with you there.
I mean, I said this at the start. I wanted that shit at the beginning. It would have made the rest of the movie scarier, or at the very least, it would have made me more upset about how it was or wasn't handling the facts of the real life case.
Sure, I'll go a step further and say I don't want any of it. I don't want it at all in this movie. I think it could have. I think the story and the characters and the relationships and the spooks and the terror could have thrived on their own without being pinned to this, this supposed real life event. And I think that just it muddies the waters and allows the filmmakers to take to make some kind of spurious choices in the end. And I don't need any of that. Just cut that shit out. Give me like what actually happened to this fictional character, Veronica, and we're good.
Yeah. Fuck it. Screw it. Damn it.
All right. Would you like to know what we're watching in 2 weeks?
What are we? Oh, yeah, you're picking. What are we watching? It's
my turn to pick.
It's your turn to pick.
And it's always a lot of pressure when you're close to Halloween, because you gotta pick something that you at least hope has some Halloween energy behind it. And I don't know if this one does, but I've been curious about this for a while. We are gonna watch one of the highest. Speaking of box office game, we're gonna be watching one of the highest grossing movies of 2020.
Oh. I know what it is.
The low-budget, made-in-Michigan chiller, The Wretched.
Oh, my God, yes. I'm so curious.
I watched like 90% of this with Allison with a Y a couple weeks ago, and we shut it off before the end, so I'm really curious to see what happens.
All right. It's just
because I don't know if I would revisit it otherwise.
It feels like necessary homework at the very
least. Like Veronica, you're going to watch the whole thing wondering what happens in the last 5 minutes.
Yeah, exactly.
When the box office landscape is as barren as the planet Arrakis, a movie like this can become number one in a weekend.
Yeah.
So, I mean, kind of an interesting story. I remember hearing about it on the radio when it happened, because it was, a low budget independent movie that they shot in our home state of Michigan. Mm-hmm. And it had a limited engagement on some drive-in screens, and just by coincidence they closed all the theaters except for the drive-ins across the country. And so this became like the number one movie on a technicality. And so
well, yeah, and also just on the basis that like no studio wanted to release a movie at that time, and so somebody was like, let's drop this, and people were in a state where they wanted to go see movies, but nothing big budget would take a risk. So such a weird coincidence that led to that.
All right, so that'll be in 2 weeks. We'll be watching The Wretched. Hopefully it'll provide a little bit of Halloween chills and spills. And until then, like we said, find us online on social media at AmonCast. Join our Discord in the show notes. We love hearing from you. We will see you in 2 weeks for every horror movie on Netflix. I'm Chris.
I'm Patrick.
I'm Steven.
See you next time.